The Artemis groaned as it pushed through the freezing Antarctic waters, its reinforced hull biting against the encroaching ice. The southernmost continent loomed ahead, a bleak expanse of unbroken white that swallowed the horizon. Dr. Amelia Hayes clutched her notebook tightly, her gloved fingers stiff in the biting cold. She was no stranger to inhospitable environments, but the Antarctic's isolation felt uniquely oppressive. Even the ship's engines seemed muted, as if the cold had sapped their strength. Beside her, Captain Mark Bryson studied the map displayed on the console, his square jaw set in grim determination. The coordinates, provided by an orbiting satellite, marked an anomaly deep beneath the ice, a thermal signature that defied logic. For weeks, it had been a growing curiosity in the scientific community, one that Amelia had been eager to unravel. Now, as the ship neared its destination, she wasn't so sure. "It's a straight shot to the shelf from here," Bryson said, breaking the silence. "We'll drop anchor, then use the rover to get closer. How's the team holding up?" "Ready enough," Amelia replied, though she doubted her own conviction. The crew had been tense since the mission began. Something about the anomaly's location, a point untouched by human exploration, stirred a primal unease. She glanced out the porthole. Snow whipped across the deck, driven by howling winds that carried an eerie, almost melodic resonance. The sound clawed at her nerves, reminding her of distant wailing. She shook the thought away, chalking it up to exhaustion. When the Artemis finally stopped, the team assembled in the staging area. Lieutenant Rachel Carter adjusted her sidearm, her eyes scanning the group as if taking stock of their resolve. Lucas Ward fiddled with his toolkit, his usual cocky demeanor subdued by the harsh environment. Dr. Ethan Torres, the geologist, was muttering excitedly about plate tectonics and geothermal activity, his enthusiasm a sharp contrast to Nadine Holt's quiet unease. The descent to the anomaly was uneventful at first. They traveled by tracked rover, its treads crunching over the ice as it carried them toward a yawning fissure. The darkness within seemed to breathe, exhaling clouds of mist that glittered under the faint sunlight. A makeshift crane lowered them one by one into the depths, their harnesses straining against their weight. Amelia was the last to descend, her boots crunching onto a surface that felt wrong beneath her feet, too smooth, too warm. The others had already gathered, their helmet lights cutting through the gloom. What they illuminated took her breath away. The fissure opened into a cavern, its walls shimmering with a faint bioluminescence. It wasn't ice. The material was something else entirely, a strange amalgamation of mineral and organic matter that pulsed faintly beneath their hands. Bryson ran a gloved hand along the surface, his brow furrowed. "This isn't natural," he said. "No kidding," Lucas muttered, shining his light on a series of angular protrusions. They resembled machinery, though their design was alien in every sense of the word. Tubes of an unknown alloy snaked along the walls, oozing a viscous black fluid that pooled at their feet. Ethan crouched beside one of the pools, his breath fogging the air. "It's warm," he said, dipping a probe into the liquid. "And alive, in a way. This could be microbial, or something bigger," Rachel interrupted. Her voice was steady, but Amelia could see the tension in her stance. She scanned the cavern with her flashlight, her hand resting on the grip of her weapon. They ventured deeper, drawn by a faint vibration that seemed to emanate from the walls. It wasn't a sound, but a sensation, a rhythmic pulsing that resonated in their bones. The corridor narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. The air grew thicker, heavy with an acrid scent that stung their nostrils. Then they saw it. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its centerpiece a towering structure of black and silver. It rose like an obelisk, its surface covered in shifting patterns that seemed to respond to their presence. Strange growths, fleshy and pulsating, clung to its base, merging seamlessly with the metallic surface. "It's a factory," Amelia said, though the word felt inadequate. The structure was alive, its machinery an extension of its organic components. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Bryson stepped forward, his boots squelching in the viscous fluid that coated the floor. "Everyone stay sharp. We document this and get out. No touching anything unless necessary." Lucas snorted. "Yeah, no danger of that." As they spread out to explore, Amelia's unease deepened. The obelisk's patterns seemed to shift faster, their movements almost imperceptible but undeniable. It was as though it was watching them, calculating their every step. She paused near a strange growth that jutted from the wall, its surface glistening under her light. It resembled a cocoon, translucent enough to reveal something shifting within. She reached out, then stopped herself. Her instincts screamed to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But the team pressed on, unaware that the factory wasn't merely a relic of a long-dead civilization. It was awake, and it had noticed them. The air in the factory was oppressive, thick with a faintly metallic scent that clung to the back of their throats. Amelia Hayes felt her chest tighten as the group pushed deeper into the alien structure. Their footsteps echoed strangely, the sound swallowed by the undulating walls that seemed to ripple in response to their presence. The faint vibration beneath their feet grew stronger, as if they were walking on a living, breathing thing. Dr. Ethan Torres stopped abruptly, crouching to examine a cluster of alien symbols etched into the wall. The glyphs shimmered faintly, the patterns shifting under his light. "This isn't random," he muttered, his gloved fingers tracing the grooves. "It's a language, a complex one." Amelia leaned over his shoulder, her own curiosity momentarily overcoming her unease. "Can you read it?" Ethan's mouth twitched into a nervous smile. "Not yet, but I think it's more than just writing. It's instructional, like a schematic." Captain Mark Bryson, standing guard nearby, cut in. "We're not here to decode an alien Rosetta Stone, Doc. Stay focused. Anything that looks like it might help us understand what this place is or get us out faster is the priority." Amelia nodded and moved on, her eyes scanning the strange biomechanical landscape. The walls pulsed with a faint, sickly glow, the light casting long shadows that seemed to flicker and move of their own accord. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as though the factory itself was studying them. "Hey, check this out," Lucas Ward called from up ahead. The engineer was standing in front of a row of cylindrical pods, each one filled with a viscous greenish fluid. He tapped on the glass of the nearest pod with his flashlight, the sound dull and wet. Inside, something stirred. Amelia's breath caught as the shadowy form pressed against the inside of the pod. It was humanoid, but grotesquely malformed, its limbs too long, its face a twisted mockery of human features. It moved sluggishly, its movements jerky and unnatural, as though it were half-formed. "What the hell is that?" Rachel Carter asked, her voice low and tense. She gripped her sidearm tightly, her finger hovering near the trigger. "Looks like it was trying to grow itself a human," Lucas said, his usual bravado tinged with unease. He took a step back, his flashlight trembling slightly. "Jesus, what kind of place is this?" Amelia stepped closer, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. The creature inside the pod pressed harder against the glass, its features contorting as though it were trying to scream. The sound, when it came, was muffled but unmistakable, a guttural, wet cry that seemed to echo in her skull. The pod's glass cracked. "Back off!" Bryson barked, pulling Amelia away as the fissures spread. The creature thrashed wildly, its limbs flailing as the pod shattered, spilling its gelatinous contents onto the floor. The creature collapsed in a twitching heap, its body writhing as if trying to pull itself together. Before anyone could react, it lunged. The thing was fast, faster than anything its malformed body should have allowed. Its elongated arms lashed out, striking Lucas in the chest and sending him sprawling. Blood sprayed across the floor as its claws tore through his suit, the edges of the wounds blackening as if burned. "Get back!" Rachel shouted, firing her weapon. The gunshots echoed through the chamber, the rounds tearing into the creature's flesh. But it didn't slow. If anything, it seemed to grow more frenzied, its body warping and twisting with each shot. Bryson grabbed Lucas, dragging him away as Amelia and Nadine tried to stem the bleeding. But the wounds were unlike anything they'd ever seen. Lucas's flesh bubbled and twisted where the creature had struck, the tissue darkening and merging with itself in a grotesque, cancerous bloom. The creature screeched, a sound so piercing it sent Amelia to her knees, clutching her ears. It lunged again, but Rachel was ready this time. Her next shot struck its head, and the thing crumpled to the floor, its body convulsing violently before finally going still. The silence that followed was deafening. "What the hell was that?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. He stared at the creature's corpse, its body already beginning to dissolve into a thick, tar-like substance that seeped into the floor. "No idea," Bryson said, his jaw clenched. "But whatever it is, we just woke it up, and now it knows we're here." Amelia looked down at Lucas, her stomach twisting at the sight of his wounds. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide with terror. Nadine worked frantically to stabilize him, but the spreading blackness under his skin told Amelia it was a losing battle. "We need to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." Bryson nodded, pulling her to her feet. "Everyone stay close. We move as fast as we can. Rachel, keep your weapon ready. Ethan, you're on point." As they regrouped, the faint vibrations beneath their feet grew stronger, the pulsing rhythm quickening as if in response to their movements. The factory was awake, and something deep within its walls was stirring. Amelia cast one last glance at Lucas before they left him behind. His body was already changing, the blackened veins spreading across his skin like cracks in fragile glass. As the team disappeared down the corridor, his screams followed them, echoing in the darkness until they were abruptly cut off. The factory was no longer just a mystery. It was a predator, and they were trapped inside its hunting ground. The labyrinth seemed endless, each corridor twisted unnaturally, the walls reshaping themselves as if responding to the intruders. The team's breaths were shallow, strained by the oppressive atmosphere that grew heavier with every step. The faint, rhythmic pulsing from the walls was now a constant thrum, synchronized with the vibration underfoot. It was as though the entire factory was alive, and its heartbeat surrounded them. Captain Mark Bryson led the way, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Behind him, Rachel Carter kept her weapon raised, her eyes darting toward every shadow that shifted. Dr. Ethan Torres clutched his scanner, its screen flickering erratically, and Amelia Hayes followed, her mind racing with questions she didn't want answered. Nadine Holt brought up the rear, her gloved hands still stained from trying to save Lucas. "Are we even going the right way?" Rachel asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but Amelia could hear the tension beneath it. Bryson didn't look back. Right now, the only direction that matters is away. Ethan slowed, his scanner emitting a series of beeps. He frowned, tapping the screen. "Hold on," he said. "I'm picking up something." Bryson turned, his jaw tight. "What kind of something?" "Energy readings," Ethan replied. "Massive ones. They're concentrated ahead." "Then we avoid it," Bryson said, his voice firm. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Amelia. What if it's the source, the key to understanding all of this? Bryson stepped closer, his glare sharp enough to cut through the dim light. "We're not here to understand it, Doc. We're here to survive." Amelia placed a hand on Ethan's arm, her voice soft. "We've already lost one. Let's not risk more." But it was too late. The corridor abruptly widened, opening into a cavernous chamber that stopped them all in their tracks. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a towering structure, its surface a grotesque fusion of organic and mechanical components. It pulsed with a sickly green light, the glow illuminating the floor around it, an intricate network of veins that snaked outward like roots. Embedded in the walls were rows of pods, larger than the ones they'd seen before. Some were cracked and empty, others still sealed, their contents writhing. Ethan's scanner went wild, the beeping rapid and erratic. "This is it," he whispered. "This is what we've been looking for." Amelia approached the structure cautiously, her breath catching as she realized what she was seeing. The veins weren't just spreading, they were feeding. Fluids flowed through them, drawn from the pods and channeled into the central mass. "This isn't a factory," she said, her voice trembling. "It's a biological processor." Bryson frowned. "What does that mean?" "It's creating something," Amelia replied, her gaze fixed on the pulsating mass. "Or refining it." Ethan knelt beside one of the veins, his fingers brushing the surface. This is older than anything we've ever encountered. Millions of years, maybe more. It's not just processing material, it's manipulating DNA, combining traits, splicing them together. "For what?" Rachel asked, her grip tightening on her weapon. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were wide, transfixed by the patterns that shifted across the surface of the structure. Amelia could see the obsession growing in his expression, the scientist in him overwhelming his survival instincts. Nadine broke the silence. "We shouldn't be here." "No kidding," Rachel muttered, scanning the room. "I've got a bad feeling about—" A deafening crack echoed through the chamber, cutting her off. The floor trembled, the veins writhing as if alive. One of the pods burst open, spilling its contents onto the ground. What emerged was larger than the first creature they had encountered, its body a twisted amalgamation of limbs, teeth, and eyes. It moved with horrifying fluidity, its segmented torso undulating as it let out a guttural, inhuman roar. "Run!" Bryson shouted, raising his weapon and firing. The bullets tore into the creature's flesh, but the wounds closed almost instantly, the tissue knitting itself back together. Rachel joined him, her shots precise, but the creature seemed only enraged by their efforts. It lunged. The team scattered, each of them barely avoiding the creature's sweeping claws. Amelia stumbled, falling to the ground as the thing's shadow loomed over her. At the last second, Rachel tackled it, driving her knife into its side. The creature screamed, a high-pitched sound that made Amelia's ears bleed, but it didn't fall. "Go!" Rachel shouted, holding her ground. "I'll cover you!" "No!" Amelia screamed, but Bryson grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a side corridor. "She's buying us time!" he yelled. "Move!" Ethan and Nadine followed, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. Behind them, Rachel's shouts and the creature's roars grew fainter, replaced by the rhythmic pounding of their own hearts. They didn't stop running until they reached another chamber, smaller but no less alien. Amelia collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. Ethan crouched nearby, his hands shaking as he stared at his scanner. "It's not just the creatures," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The factory is evolving. It's adapting to us." Amelia's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" "It's learning," Ethan replied. "The more we fight, the more it understands us. It's integrating our biology into its designs." Bryson cursed under his breath, pacing the room. "We need a way out. Now." Nadine knelt beside Amelia, her eyes filled with fear. "Rachel's gone, isn't she?" Amelia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "She saved us." Ethan stood, his face pale but determined. "There's only one way to stop this." Bryson turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "And what's that?" Ethan gestured to the scanner, the erratic beeping still filling the air. "We destroy the source, the central mass. If we can overload its systems, we might be able to collapse the structure." Bryson hesitated, his jaw tightening. "That's a hell of a gamble." "It's the only chance we've got," Ethan replied. "If we don't, it won't just stay here, it'll spread." Amelia glanced back down the corridor they had come from, her heart heavy with guilt. "Then we finish what we started." The thrum beneath their feet grew louder, the factory's pulse quickening as if it had overheard their plan. It wasn't going to let them leave without a fight. The chamber pulsed like a living heart, each beat reverberating through the walls and floor. The team stood on the edge of the monstrous central mass, the glowing veins spidering outward like the roots of some ancient, alien tree. The air was suffocating, thick with the metallic tang of blood, and a stench that burned their lungs. Dr. Ethan Torres worked frantically, his hands trembling as he assembled the makeshift explosive from what little equipment they had left. Captain Mark Bryson stood guard, his rifle aimed at the darkness, his eyes scanning for movement. Nadine Holt knelt beside Amelia Hayes, her voice a whisper as she tried to calm the biologist's ragged breathing. Amelia wasn't injured, not physically, but the horrors they had witnessed had hollowed her out. The sound of Lucas's screams, the sight of Rachel being torn apart. Each memory played on a loop in her mind. And now, the realization that they might not leave this place alive gnawed at her resolve. "Almost there," Ethan muttered, sweat dripping down his face despite the freezing air. "Just a few more minutes." "We don't have a few more minutes," Bryson said, his voice sharp. The vibrations in the floor had grown stronger, the rhythm irregular, frantic. "It knows what we're doing." As if in response, the walls began to shift. The veins writhed like living things, their glow intensifying. From the shadows came a guttural, wet sound, a chorus of clicks, snarls, and hisses. The creatures were coming. "They're here," Bryson said, raising his rifle. "Get it done, Torres." The first creature emerged from a tunnel to their left, its body a grotesque amalgamation of sinewy limbs and jagged protrusions. Its many eyes glistened in the dim light, reflecting hunger and rage. Bryson fired, the bullets tearing through its flesh. But it didn't stop. Behind it, more shadows moved, shapes too twisted to comprehend. "Go!" Bryson shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I'll hold them off." "No!" Amelia cried, grabbing his arm. "You can't." "I said go," Bryson barked, pulling free. "You want to make it out of here, then finish the job." Amelia stumbled back, her heart pounding as she turned toward Ethan. "How much longer?" "Done," Ethan said, his voice barely audible over the rising cacophony. He held up the device, a crude but powerful explosive rigged to the central mass. "We just need to plant it." Bryson fired another burst, his teeth gritted as the creature surged closer. "Then move." The team sprinted toward the central mass, its surface rippling like liquid as they approached. Ethan climbed onto one of the larger veins, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. Nadine and Amelia covered him, their weapons shaking as they fired at the approaching creatures. One of the beasts broke through their line, lunging at Amelia. She screamed, stumbling backward as its claws swiped inches from her face. Nadine threw herself at the creature, driving her knife into its neck. The beast howled, its blood spraying black and acrid, but it lashed out, dragging her down with it. "Nadine!" Amelia shouted, but Bryson grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "There's nothing you can do," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. Ethan planted the explosive, his fingers flying over the controls. "It's set," he shouted. "We've got 60 seconds." "Then run!" Bryson yelled, shoving Amelia toward the nearest exit. The team bolted, their footsteps pounding against the shifting floor. The factory was alive now, its walls convulsing, its veins bursting with streams of thick, black fluid. The creatures gave chase, their howls blending with the deafening roar of the collapsing chamber. Amelia tripped, falling hard against the ground. Bryson stopped, hauling her to her feet, but one of the creatures was already upon them. It leapt, its claws sinking into Bryson's back. He cried out, twisting as he fired point blank into its chest. The creature fell, but Bryson staggered, blood pouring from his wounds. "Go," he rasped, shoving Amelia forward. "Don't stop." Tears streamed down her face as she obeyed, running toward the faint light of the exit. Behind her, Bryson turned to face the horde, his rifle raised one last time. The explosion rocked the factory, a blinding flash of light consuming the central mass. The force knocked Amelia off her feet, the shockwave tearing through the corridors. She crawled forward, her hands scraping against the jagged floor as the world around her collapsed. She burst onto the surface, the freezing wind slicing through her like a blade. She turned back, her heart pounding as she waited for the others. No one came. The ground beneath her buckled, a massive fissure splitting the ice. The factory groaned, its death throes echoing across the desolate landscape as it was swallowed by the earth. Amelia fell to her knees, her breath hitching in the frigid air. They were gone, all of them. Rachel, Lucas, Nadine, Ethan, Bryson. She was alone. Her radio crackled to life, a faint, broken signal. "Amelia, do you copy?" It was a rescue team, their voices distant and distorted. Amelia fumbled with the device, her hands trembling. "I'm here," she choked out. "I'm alive." But as she spoke, a sharp pain lanced through her chest. She gasped, clutching at her ribs as the pain spread, her veins blackening beneath her skin. The factory's infection had reached her, its final gift. Amelia collapsed onto the ice, her vision blurring as the rescue team's voices faded into static. Above her, the aurora borealis danced across the sky, its colors cold and indifferent. The factory was gone, but its legacy had found a new host. And deep beneath the ice, something stirred once more. The price of survival was paid in blood, but the debt was far from settled.